Hello, disciples, and welcome to another episode of Imagine with Me, an opportunity that I have to meet with creative and innovative leaders across the life of our church. And today I'm honored to have two colleagues who are in leadership across the life of our church as we work to move the church and our society towards action against climate change, which is ravishing our earth. I'm happy to bring to the stage today the Reverend Carol Divine, who serves as Minister of Green Chalice and Director of Blessed Tomorrow, the faith program of Eco America, and the Reverend Caroline Hamilton Arnold, who serves as Associate Director for Domestic Disaster Response for Week of Compassion. So Carol and Caroline, I'm so happy that you're here with me for this very important conversation. Hello, good to see you both. Thank you so much for taking the time to widen the awareness of the church about what we're doing as disciples to improve both information and awareness and move towards action against this devastating it's a winter storm. Olive is moving across the Midwest as we're recording this, and we've had additional hurricanes and floods, and everyone sees this. And it's not enough to just bow our heads and pray. We have to learn more so that we can do more. So why don't we start with Carol? Tell us a little bit about your work with Green Chalice and Blessed Tomorrow, and then we'll ask Caroline to introduce her work, and then we'll get deeper into conversation.
Well, thanks so much. It's so wonderful to be with both of you today. And I agree that we're all seeing these devastating effects of climate change around the United States and around the globe. And disciples are doing incredible things. Green Chalice has over 200 congregations that are living out their faith actively by caring for the earth, by caring for neighbors, by centering climate justice in worship and outreach and in so many other ways. I'm inspired every week by the disciples congregations and individual disciples and the actions that they're taking and leading on climate, and give great thanks for that. And I also would just say that I'm also wearing a multi-faith hat with Eco America, and I'm just delighted to work with denominations of all faiths as we work together to try to figure out what we can do across denominations, across faiths, to work together to live out our faith as we stand on this holy ground together.
Thanks so much, Carol. And Caroline, why don't you share what your work is with Week of Compassion, particularly around not only disaster response, but climate change?
Yeah. So Week of Compassion is the Relief, Refugee, and Development Mission Fund for the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. And one piece of that is responding to natural and human-caused disasters, including those climate disasters that we are seeing becoming more frequent and more severe, that are affecting so many of our neighbors. So a good part of my work is helping to bring resources and connections to our disciples' congregations when they are living in the midst of disaster, recovering from disasters, and trying to serve others. And then also to connect us with local partners and ecumenical partners who are doing the long work of rebuilding communities and livelihoods and homes for the well-being of disaster survivors. As we also look at recovering from disasters, we know that being prepared is a key piece of it. And so Week of Compassion has been developing trainings and curriculum and resources for congregations to become more disaster ready, to mitigate against the risks in our congregations for our property and our people, and then also to make plans for how we can best respond to the needs of our neighbors.
Awesome. I think one of the things, the conversations I know that are happening is how do we move from just response and recovery, right, to preparedness, not only to different kinds of disasters, natural disasters, but what are the things that we can do to ensure that we're prepared? Perhaps each of you can share a little bit about things, steps that congregations can take to be proactive in both preparedness and advocacy. So maybe we'll start with the idea of preparedness. What are the kinds of things, education or initiatives, that each of you recommend and work with congregations to increase their awareness of just being prepared for some kind of disaster, or even how they can advance and begin to inhibit the increasing negative effects of climate change?
Well, I'll just jump in because this is really Caroline's area. But since Caroline and I have been working together, Green Chalice and Week of Compassion have partnered since the beginning of 2020, and have been so privileged to do several things together. But since Caroline and I have started working together, I don't do any trainings that I don't also make the connection between climate disasters, weather disasters, and the climate crisis, and the importance of responding to both. And I would lift up also that I was blessed as a pastor of a congregation to walk through some of the things that Caroline can share with us that I learned from her and from Week of Compassion, in order to what can we do as a congregation to be prepared. And that while we do those preparedness acts, we can, there's a couple of things. One is we can also be looking at what are the ways that we can lower our energy use and save money? What are ways that we can be more resilient in terms of climate and walking a little more gently on the earth? And in my own experience, by walking through these processes with our congregational leaders, we actually became tighter. People got energy, and we were taking, this huge crisis head on and working together. And so it also was, I don't want to say a fun process, but it was it was building in our relationships, our connections within our congregation, to our denomination, and to our community. So I'm sorry, I'll stop and let you take on this.
No, I mean, I have had the chance to engage with several congregations that are Green Chalice congregations. And Carol, I'll just a little aside before we get to Caroline, but Carol and I were invited to participate in a conversation about climate change at the United Church of Canada's General Conference. United Church of Canada is now a full communion partner. And we had a video that featured one of our Green Chalice congregations in Midway, Kentucky. And it was revelatory for the leaders in that denomination. They were talking big theory, right? And we were able to offer them an example of what a local congregation can do. And that infused such energy, and I think opened a lot of eyes for that. So that kind of energy about what we could actually do, right, on the ground to both mitigate the increasing impacts of climate change, but also be prepared. That energy should not be underestimated. And thank you, Carol, for helping me to facilitate that conversation with the United Church of Canada. We were able to provide a wonderful example from one of our congregations that really shifted how they thought about the whole topic of climate change. And it was really powerful to watch their response to that story. So Caroline, let's talk a lot. I'm proud to be on the board of Week of Compassion. And so I stay close to the things and the ways in which that ministry is innovating. And I always say, when Week of Compassion is there, the whole church is there. And it's important for people to know that when we help to fund Week of Compassion, we're able to do and be in places that we physically, like sometimes it's not good to be, they don't want you there on the ground, right, after a particular disaster. And you guys have made that move to close the circle to begin to help prepare congregations for preparedness. So we understand, right, what you guys do in terms of recovery, but help us understand better about what you're doing in education around preparedness.
Yeah, part of it is helping congregations claim the power of our congregations, that as severe weather events, climate disasters become more frequent and more severe, the resources become stretched. And so local churches become all the more important, and local houses of worship more broadly become all the more important in responding to the needs of the people around them, those who have been affected by disasters, just because there are not going to be other resources coming in with every disaster. When there are so many stacking on top of each other, we just start to run out of the ability from kind of national level responses and really have to drill down in local responses. I read a report at the end of last year that in the last 10 years, 90% of US counties experienced a climate disaster. In the last 10 years, 90% of our counties. And so this is truly a question of when your area will be affected by a climate event. And so our congregations can be places of healing and of support to neighbors. Some of that is, like Carol said, making some steps to become more resilient in our buildings and our processes. St. Paul's Christian Church in North Carolina created a rain garden and rain cisterns, which had like multiple fabulous impacts. They're able to water their own garden, use less water. It's reducing a flood risk for an area around the church. It's helping to reduce the pollution of runoff across their parking lot. Just all of these compounding benefits from a fairly small project that is a sort of disaster preparedness piece and climate action. We also at Week of Compassion are doing work to help congregations consider their assets. What kinds of material resources are in your churches? What kinds of ministries could be shifted so that they could be brought to bear in the event of a disaster, and assessing what kinds of relationships are present in your congregation and with your community ministry partners. And that's another area where disaster preparedness and the sort of larger question and larger effort of addressing climate change are really intertwined, because those relationships are key for both. And as we build relationships across our communities, we can address both the symptoms that we're experiencing with climate disasters and the greater disease that is affecting our globe with the climate crisis.
I think you raise a really important point about relationships, because sometimes in congregations you can be, happy just coming to church and doing your thing and having coffee hour, and maybe you have a mission project or something that happens. But when these disasters happen in your community, right? If it's not you, then there is usually a wake-up call. I remember being in Missouri after tornadoes had hit in the Jefferson City in that area a few years ago, and just being in the room with many pastors whose churches and congregational families had been impacted, and that there's trauma. This is trauma, and I can't imagine that group having traveled that path alone. So what others had learned before them, they were there to help and share. And that sense of community is so important, because it is traumatic to experience, one of these events. And I think if you're isolated beforehand, then you don't leave that experience isolated at all. And that sense of partners, even if there are other disciples congregations or other Christian congregations, or there are mosques or synagogues or other community partners who want to join with you, I think community gets redefined, right? In these areas. And that's just so important. Are there specific ways in which congregations can get involved to receive this kind of education and initiative? If I want to be sure that my congregation has a preparedness plan in place, or if I want to become a Green Chalice. How do we engage each of your ministries to get rolling in some of this work if we haven't already done so?
Yeah, we have a whole page on our website, weekofcompassion.org/prepare. And there are some simple steps that congregations can take, a full, robust congregational guide that can be a little overwhelming, but it has great information and a whole plan for walking your congregation through a preparedness plan creation. We offer training, so you can reach out to Week of Compassion, and I offer those, and my colleague Riza Spratt also offers those trainings. And there is a spot on that page where you can sign up with what's called Willing to Respond, which is a essentially a registry platform for congregations to indicate, yes, we want to take steps to become more prepared, to be ready to respond to the needs of our neighbors. And it allows Week of Compassion to help send you additional resources, walk with you in that process, and connect you with other people who are also doing that work. weekofcompassion.org/prepare.
weekofcompassion.org/prepare. Excellent, excellent ways. And Carol, what are ways that congregations can get involved with the work that you're doing?
And so Green Chalice is greenchalice.org. And also we do, workshops, trainings, and we have a Green Chalice congregational program. And we always, as part of our work, point to Week of Compassion and ask for congregations to be thinking about and doing both at the same time. And I also want to just lift up that it has been underlying our conversation already, but the grief, the stress, the anxiety that is in our world in general, among our clergy in particular, but most especially among our young people. And I think it is really important to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
And to realize the power that people of faith have because of God's power in us and through us. And Terri, you have heard me say this quote before, but it is what I carry in my heart right now. At the end of the book, All We Can Save, the authors say, it's a wonderful time to be alive in a moment that matters so much. And for us as people of faith, there is no better time for us to be alive than right now, because what we do really matters. And there is still time to make a difference. And we can live out our faith with power and with love in ways that maybe we didn't realize in the past in this way. And so it can be really heavy, this topic. Both climate disasters and climate crisis is heavy. But I want us to also just be like, we are empowered because we are together in this.
Yes. And thank you for that. I wanted to end, Carol, as you've given me the perfect segue, with your sharing some stories of that hope and energy. It is a heavy topic. It is, it's not fun, right? To continue to see, be it storms or tornadoes. I remember the summer of 22, a derecho, a straight wind storm came through our neighborhood, felled a lot of trees. No one's roof came up, but it took off the top of a huge maple tree in my backyard where my son's wedding eventually was held. And, the sirens are going off. I've never experienced that kind of wind event in my life. And we were downstairs, and there were several trees that had fallen and blocked some of the streets. And we were just out after the storm. Some neighbors on a street we knew, but neighbors from blocks over, people were just in the street walking around, trying to be sure that people were okay. And there were people I'd never met that that my husband and I met on the street that day. And it was a devastating sight to see so many beautiful, I live in an older neighborhood with a lot of mature trees. It took out a lot of these trees, took out a couple of, some trees fell on houses. It was not nearly a tornado, but just that kind of event we began to see a kind of community that we hadn't seen before. So in the midst of that trauma, and in the midst of what can often be despair when you think about it, because the problem is so big, let's end with perhaps some stories of where you've seen hope, either in congregations or ways in which, like in my neighborhood, what came out of that was a greater awareness, even if it's paying a little bit more attention, right, to the sirens. Some people don't take these things seriously. And what are you ready to get into a safe place, into a basement, seeing communities come together? Share some stories that can leave us with some hope here.
Well, Caroline, you probably, I'm thinking of First Christian Church Madisonville, and I'm in the state of Kentucky that has experienced two very major weather disasters in the last year, huge tornadoes in the western part of the state, and incredible flooding in the eastern part of the state. But Caroline has been involved on the ground in those. Do you want to share?
Sure. Yeah, we've got congregations that are responding all across the state to host volunteer teams, to rebuild houses. And one of the great things is that the partners we're working with to rebuild houses are keeping in mind the effects that we can have on the climate crisis in the ways that we rebuild. So rebuilding it with high energy efficiency, with as little waste as possible, and building structures that are safe and will last. And so encouraged by the partners who are working to rebuild across Western Kentucky and respond to the flooding in Eastern Kentucky. I am really encouraged by a newer partnership that we have in response to Hurricane Ida in Southeast Louisiana. With an organization called the Lowlander Center and the First Peoples Conservation Council, 5 indigenous tribes in far southeastern Louisiana, where land and water are all intermingled, responding to specifically Hurricane Ida recovery needs, but in ways that are communal, that are culturally specific to these nations, and that are mindful of the restoration of the ecosystems that are so crucial and are sacred to these communities. And that we are able to partner with them to train disaster case managers who can accompany survivors of the hurricane through their process of recovery and rebuilding, and to continue to knit together some more of those communal ties for them to be able to respond to, as you said, the compounding needs and compounding traumas.
Right. I think it's really important to also name that this is contextual work, right? Ministry is always local and contextual, and what we're learning about how people live together in their own communities. And you're hearing so much about the things that First Nations peoples have to teach us through their own faith practices and indigenous practices about just caring for the earth, be it how they manage forests and how to avoid forest fires and all those kinds of things. I think being open to all the different conversations that can take place can be a hopeful. It gives you some sense of there's something I can do, right? There's something that I can learn about to better manage. I'm thinking about New Covenant Christian Church in Nashville back in the 20s, when there were a series of tornadoes and floods, and how that church pretty much stayed open around the clock to minister to a community, an African-American community that was already economically devastated. And so had even, when certain communities are already devastated and then you have a natural disaster, those inequities are often laid bare. And so there's even more need to respond, and even a greater challenge, right, to help with preparedness when you have unequal resourcing of different communities. So I think all of these things are just so important. I want to thank you both for just this time to learn more about what the church is doing, what Green Chalice and Week of Compassion are doing. that it is possible to do things as a congregation to not only help you prepare, but to be a better citizen, right? A more effective and faithful citizen in terms of the use of your resources and ways to mitigate our impact on the earth, and do so faithfully in our context, and making partnerships across our communities as well as across the life of the church. So you can go to greenchalice.org, and you can go to weekofcompassion.org/prepare to learn more about the education that they have. We have to be the church we say we are. We say a lot of wonderful things. And I think your two ministries offer us ways to actually do and be as we imagine this new world together. So thanks so much, Carol and Caroline, for joining me today for this really important conversation. Thank you so much. Disciples, I hope that you will be mindful of the opportunity to educate your congregation, to work across your communities, to find other partners, to ensure that you're not only prepared for your own congregation and community, but that you can build relationships that will allow you to partner to respond and make your own community better, and be ready to respond in the event of a disaster. So grateful for the work that Green Chalice and Week of Compassion do. It's important, disciples. There's so much that we say. We must be the church that we say we are. And I hope you'll take advantage of the opportunity to work through these two ministries to really make a difference in our world. Thanks so much again for being with us today. Remember that God loves you, and so do I. Hope does not disappoint us. So let's be mindful to hold on to hope. I'll close with my favorite scripture, Philippians 1:6. I am confident that the one who has begun a good work in you will complete it. I believe that God is with us, and in that confidence, I place my hope. Take care, good friends, and we'll see you on the next episode of Imagine with Me.